Sorry, I'm a little late. Whatever. Things happened, and my laptop's behaving a little bit oddly right now. Okay, so yes, I'm running late. I'm sorry. Wow, later than I realized. Okay, sorry about that. So here's June 29, right? We are we are coming to the end of a month, so of every day, and then next week I will jump into Tuesday, Thursday, doing at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern in the United States. And um yeah, I'm going to continue with the same theme, like the same looking for sex passages and stories that talk about sex, the relationship we call marriage, and um encounters that involve harm and abuse that involve genitalia, intimate body parts. So I'm going to continue with this lens indefinitely because I don't know how long it's going to take doing it just twice a week instead of every day to get through all the stories. But that in and of itself is part of the point. There are so many biblical passages, and in particular in the Hebrew Bible, that touch on this topic that people are often not aware of, or they're not aware of how harmful the way it's handled is. They're not often, just aware of kind of all these pieces, right? That the Bible has, the Bible offers vignettes related to these topics. And if people are not conscious of the way they're being informed on these topics, they are quite likely to internalize some really harmful ideas and ways of thinking about humans and bodies and sex, and therefore the relationships we call marriage. So my intention behind all of this is because my current interest is this conversation about marriage in the Bible. What do the texts actually say, right? That's my the book that's coming out this fall, right? Marriage in the Bible, what do the texts say? That's in a sense what drove me to take up this particular conversation, this particular approach to working through biblical passages on this topic, was that book that's coming out, and just wanting to talk about it with people, that there's a lot going on in the Bible that people of faith are often not having conversations about, or people, I get the sense that many of the people watching this kind of content are maybe not any longer in faith communities, but perhaps grew up in them, or are maybe trying to find their way into more progressive faith communities, that kind of thing. So I am interested in this particular component of the conversation. Let's be honest about what the biblical texts actually do and do not say about this thing we call marriage. And by the way, it just so happens that biblical texts teach people to think about sex and marriage as intimately intertwined, to the point where sex is really all that's discussed when marriage is talked about in the Bible. And that is true even of the Newer Testament texts, right? When you look at the Newer Testament, the only references Jesus makes directly to this institution that we call marriage, which was very different for them, is in light of divorce. And the reason that he says that divorce is a problem is because men get to claim women's bodies. Like, it's all about sex and women as possessions, right? Ancient ideas, ancient mindset, still alive and well. So it's not, I don't think we get to just give him a pass because he's reflecting the context out of which he came. We absolutely don't get to give Jesus a pass, in my opinion, because it's Jesus. And people absolutely pay attention to what he says, or in this case, actually don't pay much attention to what he says, which is why I decided to write about it all. So people are still influenced by these ideas in the scriptures, and people are still perpetuating the practices and beliefs and the worldview. That's what I mean when I talk about worldviews. How did people think and believe that the world worked? And that includes how they thought about their relationship to God in their context, and how they saw their interactions with each other. all of that is a part of a worldview. And how do they value humans? Not as differently as today, actually. And part of the reason for that is because these texts embody a patriarchal worldview, and these texts continue to inform at least Western cultures more than I think most people are conscious of. So plenty of fodder for this ongoing conversation. So there's that. Very fun. All right, I'm gonna move on then into the topic for today. So we have, it's a short one. It's the story about the woman who is quote who had been caught in adultery. So what actually I'd like to do, I'm going to take a couple minutes to say a few things about the story. But here's the thing: if we were in a face-to-face class, what I would be doing right now is I'd be asking students in the class, the people in the classroom, to tell me what your thoughts are about this story in John chapter 8, the story that I'm about to read for story time. So what I'd like to do then, since we're not in face-to-face, for those of you who are able to be here live, I would love it if you would populate the chat for just a couple minutes, for just a minute or so. What are your thoughts about this story of, I don't know how you've heard it referred to, the woman caught in adultery? This is the story about this woman is brought before Jesus in a temple, and they say, should we stone her or not because we caught her in adultery? That story. I'm not looking for like long debriefs about making sense of it all and showing off everything you know. I am looking for, what have you been taught? Like, what's the takeaway on this? Is Jesus the like swooping in and like saving the day? Like, what's the takeaway on this? So I'm gonna ask you all to do that if you're comfortable doing that in the chat. And I want to discuss this briefly with you all. Oh, actually, this is funny because I forgot to do this yesterday, and I again almost forgot. All right, I see the question, considering anew, and we'll address that. But so thank you. And then, what other thoughts do you all have about this story in John chapter 8? What I forgot to do yesterday, I did have it open, and I meant to share it yesterday. Again, it's not a big deal, but I meant to share the map of the area of Palestine, because at the beginning we were talking about the fact that all four gospels did have the story from yesterday, the anointing of Jesus, right? His feet, or his head. And there aren't that many stories that all four gospels have, so it's kind of nice that they all have that. And they two of them say that it took place in Capernaum, in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper. One says in Nain, and the other says in Bethany at the house of Lazarus. So they don't agree on where it took place. So I raised this point yesterday. This does not need to be a crisis of faith. It actually I think is helpful, because it's a good example of why we should be reading the Gospels separately, letting them say what they're saying, and honoring what they're trying to do. Does that mean that that story took place 3 different times? No, actually, it doesn't mean that. It means that there's a belief that this particular story, this particular event took place, and all 4 gospel writers are using it to slightly different ends. But also, on the flip side of that, then, why it feels like a crisis of faith for some people is because many Christians are taught to think of all of the scriptures as perfect, as God intended, right? Dictated by God, if you will, something like that. And so when you have a contradiction, many Christians are taught to find a way to resolve the conflict instead of just letting that be there, because of the way people are taught how to understand what the Bible is and is not. And so the the second book that I wrote was intended to help people start having a conversation, essentially for themselves or with other people, about how to think more critically about what the Bible is and how to then understand it better. And it's interesting to me. I've had lots of people over the last 20 years actually come away strengthened in their faith because of being able to read it more critically, because they're more progressive or critical thinkers, and they need to be able to engage that in order to have any way to relate to these scriptures or even the communities that are reading it. Um, so there are a lot of different ways someone can go with what it is I'm trying to do with the Bible, and that's why I do it. There's just a lot of good that can come out of, I think, having a better understanding about it. So let me just show you very briefly. And again, this isn't, oh, wait, let me share. Let's see. Share very, oh dear, where's the share? I know, I have it. It's right here. Yeah, my computer is very slow today. I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm not sure it'll work. I thought it was gonna, let's see. Let's see. There we go. That and that. Yes. Okay, good. Here we go. I'm so sorry, you all. This is a really interesting issue for my the effect that my slow moving computer is having on this whole presentation. So I appreciate your patience with me on this. Huh. There we go. Okay. So what I want to point out here is simply that the town of Bethany is down here near the bottom of this map. So if you're looking at this, what you're seeing here in this map is really very closely zoomed in onto what is now Israel and West Bank and Palestine. And you can see where Judea is listed, and this white circle, the open circle, not filled in, is Jerusalem, right? And so there are a handful of towns right around there that you've probably heard of. If you see Emmaus to the northwest and Bethany to the north, kind of east, southeast, south, yeah, anyway, east, southeast, whatever. And Bethlehem, southwest, whatever, right? So those are, and Jericho, northeast of there. So those are all right around Jerusalem. And so those are towns that are referenced at the very end of the Gospels, at least for the Synoptics, since those have a 1-year cycle that they're running through. And Jesus himself, according to the story, is from the northern part, way up here in Galilee. And I'm not doing a very good job here with managing the pieces. So anyway, Galilee up here near the Sea of Galilee. And you can see that Nain is up here in this region-ish, and you can see that Capernaum is up here, and Magdala is where Mary Magdalene of Magdala is from, right? And the Cana, the story of Cana, turning water into wine happened there, all that stuff, right? Nazareth. So Luke's gospel has yesterday's story, the anointing, taking place in the region of Nain or Capernaum, one of the two, but up here. And the others have it taking place down here in Bethany. Matthew and Mark say it's in the town of Bethany at Simon the leper's house, and John's gospel says it's at Lazarus, Martha, and Mary's house. I don't need it to be, one of them to be true, but it is just worth noting, right? So there's a visual of it. Okay. I'm seeing some comments. So let me just very briefly, for those of you who aren't looking at comments, what constitutes adultery, and is it the same for men and women? So these are questions I asked you all comments to put in the chat in terms of what you think of in terms of the story in John 8 that we're about to read together. The lesson of the story is only the sinless can judge the sinful, and there are no sinless on this earth. I'm not comfortable. The Bible is not trustworthy. I appreciate that. I want to affirm that you are making a rather important comment, actually, in that Constellation Pegasus. that it feels it almost feels dangerous to go there and to try to open yourself up to it for some possible guidance or meaning, if I'm understanding you correctly. JBeats 777, since it's a late addition, I think it's going with Pauline theology that the law was harsh and needed reform. That's a very interesting take. First of all, how did they catch her in adultery? Yes. Second of all, what happened to the guy? Yes. Fantastic. Because didn't one of the Abraham lineage have a wife and was pursuing sex for money? To me, that's adultery. The guy walks, right? Also, let's all go out. You guys are chatting about hanging out later, which makes me super happy. I also find having the servant women to bed adultery. Yeah, the enslaved women being forced to have sex. So it's rape and adultery at the same time, but it's not actually adultery in their context. Let me just address that. I think that's a really interesting comment. And I promise I'm going to. Oh, Aisha, I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't normally do this. I really hope, Aisha, that I feel like I offended you on one of the earlier one of the live streams this week, and I did not mean to do any sort of sex negative shaming thing. So I'm I'm saying it in public because I tried to comment back and I just want you to know that is never my intention. And I'm sorry if I did that. And I appreciate that you said something to like bring it to my attention. And I really didn't mean to. So I don't know if there's a way for us to like chat afterwards or I don't know. But I just want to clear that up at some level. Finally, someone stood up for a woman. Okay. Jesus protected the lady. I'm going to shift the language there and say protected the woman. I'm from the South. I don't like the word lady. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to embarrass you at all, but I'm afraid I might be. I just want you to know that like when I hear the word lady, Storm Large's what the fuck is ladylike runs through my head. That is my response to the word lady. And I totally get it that most people mean it in semi-respectful or whatever. It's just a nicer way than saying it feels nicer, more polite to say lady than woman. And I'd actually rather be woman because I've had lady used in my life in ways that were very like controlling and expecting me to be proper. And so I love Storm Large's ladylike. But your point is taken. Jesus does protect someone. But is that enough? As my description for this video says, is that enough? But before we jump into this, one comment about the census and the gospel never happened, right? Right, that's true. Okay. When the comment about someone in Abraham's lineage had a woman and was pursuing sex for money. Have a wife and was pursuing sex for money. To me, that I'm not quite sure. No, it wasn't that one. It was the one about. It was the one about the women to bed. I also find having the enslaved women to bed adultery. Here's the thing about that. And this is serious, in my opinion. This is actually really important to me. There are Christian apologists who want to say that the laws and commands around slavery in the Bible are not and the reality of slavery in the Bible weren't as bad as what we've seen, say, on the North American continent. And that is absolutely not true, but people want that to be true. And I get why people want that to be true, okay? I'm never in favor of being cruel and rude to people who have very strong convictions that just that are what I refer to as underinformed, okay? But this issue of saying that in requiring an enslaved woman to have sex with the master in the household, that's not adultery. So, which is partly because of the way enslavement worked, but it's also partly just the way their framework for human relationships and human bodies worked. So, technically speaking, biblically speaking, adultery is an issue when the woman involved is already owned or claimed by a man. It is entirely heteronormative. Okay, let's just be very clear about that. Lots of hetero issues here. And it's about straight hetero men having sex with the wrong women. And, or I should say, straight performing men who behave as if they're straight, as if they're hetero. I'd really like to change the language around straight because I don't like bent straight, right? That's what you're implying. Anyway, it's really about hetero men or men, have just not being able to control themselves. It's really what it's all about, and trying to blame the women somehow for it. I'm sure you've never heard of anything like that. That mentality is alive and well today. Thank you very much. Slut shaming women for whatever it is they choose to wear on their body, as if it's that alone is what's controlling a man's body. Okay, reactions to her. Okay, no, but seriously, the reason that forcing an enslaved person in your house to have sex with you is not adultery, biblically speaking, it's because that enslaved woman doesn't, most of the time, actually belong to a man. She isn't, quote, married to a man. There are laws in the Hebrew Bible that talk about, sometimes you might actually have an enslaved man and you therefore go get a woman for him. And so those are cases where it sounds like then you having sex with that woman would be adultery, although I'm not sure that anyone would really care, unfortunately, because these are enslaved people and they don't count as fully human in the same way that the men in the household do. The women in the household are secondary status. But so, I mean, I think maybe you were being funny, but it's really important to me to be really clear about this, that what's really going on here are issues of property and possession, claiming bodies, claiming rights to someone else's body, that kind of a thing. So no, forcing Hagar to have sex with Abraham was not adultery, because according to the storyline, Hagar didn't have a man. She was just in their household. She was their property according to their social understandings and right. So she wasn't paired with a guy. So that wasn't adultery. It wasn't. Abraham was, quote, in our mind, cheating on Sarah, but that's not how they saw it. So he was not committing adultery. She had to have belonged to a man in order for Abraham having sex with her or forcing himself on her, raping her, to have been a form of adultery. Okay? So really important clarification there. Gosh, yeah, slavery then as recently, sorry, I'm having a hard time. Having a hard time with my computer today. Let's do story time. Let's actually do the story time that everybody came here for. Although I guess in a sense, you're actually coming here for more than story time at this point, because I'm doing more than just story time and you keep showing up. So I'm guessing you're down for most of, or some of that. Yes, we are hugging. Was that back to me? Or is that somebody else? I don't know, Aisha, but yeah, that's what I'll go for that. Okay. So I have the passages in my email, and at this point, I just don't want to open up something. But this story in John chapter 8 doesn't show up in every ancient manuscript. It shows up in 3 different locations. Actually, I think potentially 4. Here in John 8, earlier in John, like a chapter earlier, later in John, and also in Luke. So this story itself, as at least one of the comments alluded to, is a later addition to the gospel traditions. Okay. So there's that. And again, on some basic level, I don't actually care at the end of the day, because it's in here, and therefore it's been a story that's been used to inform people. And that's what I care about, is what are these scriptures doing? How are people embodying these scriptures, or letting these ideas and themes and messages affect them as humans and the way they relate to each other? That's what I care about, is really just, it's in here. What are we doing with it? I appreciate that other people want to do all that digging around comparing text manuscripts and codices and all the different things and showing that this isn't that and blah, blah. I appreciate there are other people doing that because I don't want to do it, but it's helpful on a basic level in terms of understanding where we're starting from with this collection. But my materialist training, I chose to do materialist theory in my doctoral work because I wanted to have some grounding for talking about these are not just stories on a page. These are influential. These stories have helped to shape people's minds, the way people think about the world, their worldview. These stories shape what people believe about good and bad, evil, sin, all those kinds of things. And referencing a conversation from yesterday, I don't like using the word sin to talk about people, to qualify people, or to talk about these kinds of things. I personally, that was actually the kind of the linchpin for me, was in my graduate school. So in my PhD years, I started at Baylor University for my for PhD work in New Testament early Christianity. And at Baylor, anyway, cut to the point. I was my second year there. I stepped in to fill in as a temporary assistant pastor, associate pastor, while they were looking for an associate pastor, because theirs left somewhat, kind of quickly. They didn't expect it to happen or whatever. And so that year, I helped lead worship every Sunday. I did the call to confession and the assurance of pardon. But what happens, for those of you who are not familiar with any of these things, a call to confession is basically someone standing in front of the congregation telling them that they're all sinful and that we all need to confess our sins. And I was in a Presbyterian church at the time, and in that setting, there's a corporate confession of sin that is read. It's usually printed in the bulletin in that particular tradition and congregation. Sometimes it's projected up on screens that everybody reads, but it's everybody's saying these things, and there's the intent is that somewhere in there you can relate to something that's being said, and it's kind of drawing our attention to our shortcomings and wanting to be aware of that and move on, or be sorry for that, and then also be grateful that we're forgiven so we can move on and be better people, or something like that. And then at the end of that, then the person grants the assurance of pardon, right? The reminder that you have been forgiven because of Jesus, right? All this stuff. So that's what I did for a year. And it was somewhere around the 6th, 7th, 8th, 7th month of that. I was just overwhelmed by what it was doing to me personally to week in and week out tell these really lovely human beings that they were sinful. And it wasn't enough to me that I also got to tell them they were forgiven. It just wasn't enough. It was not the negative, the effect of the negative wasn't being countered by the positive in my world and my emotional state, my being. And I needed something that wasn't going to do that to people. And I just finished out the year the best I could, doing what I was asked to do that year. But that was kind of the closing of the door to that whole thing for me, was saying every week that to people, that you're sinners, right? You're a bunch of sinners. So no, I agree with some of the comments that were made yesterday after the live stream, that the language and framing of sinfulness and sinner, I don't think that we need to be reminded that we're not perfect. Pretty sure most of us are paying attention enough, but maybe not, I don't know. But the whole thing about psychology, and it takes 7 positives to counter 1 negative, that kind of thing, that's what was piling up on me, right? I wasn't doing 7 positives for each 1 negative. And it was this one big negative for me, and this big vat of bleh, sinfulness, and you are not worthy, and you're, who God created you to be was a, bleh, and you need to be forgiven, and God's so angry at you being sinful that, like, God's son had to die for you. Like, ugh, it's all just awful, awful. I realized I'd rather be telling people some positive things about themselves instead of telling them they're a bunch of fucking sinners. So yeah. So all of that is also important to note ahead of time as we read this story. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling at this point. Okay. Um so this isn't original to any of the gospels, but I don't care because it's in there. It's a thing that is in there to be used to inform people. People preach from it every year. People do Sunday school, Bible studies, all the things from it. Okay. So let's look at, I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version because it's the tangible version of the Bible that I have. Maybe one day I will change to a different translation, but for now, that's what I'm working with. Okay. So then, so early in the morning, Jesus came to the temple. So we are in Jerusalem at this point. Okay. There's a reference to the Mount of Olives the night before, blah, blah, blah. So in the morning, so everybody picture this, right? In the morning, everybody's been hanging out, partying in the Mount of Olives late Thursday nights. Friday morning, everybody's in the temple, right? He came again to the temple. All the people came to him. And I want to just comment that when they say all the people, they don't actually mean men and women. They just mean men, right? Just so we're clear. Kind of like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah when it says all the people of the town, all the men, as if people and men are anonymous, are it's synonymous. They're not, but they are, biblically speaking. So we only care about the men. Okay. It's been a long week, can you tell? Okay. All the people, so a whole bunch of men is what they're saying, came to him and sat down, and he sat down and began to teach them. So he's sitting down and there are a whole bunch of men hanging out, maybe some standing up, maybe some, chilling out on their mats. I don't know, doing a little downward dog. This is when I really need to be like live so you can laugh at my ridiculous jokes. Are you familiar with Saint Edith Stein? Oh, I like that you called Edith Stein a saint. Okay, I'm gonna have to come back to that. Group huggies. Yes, we're getting all kinds of love today. Okay, focus. Okay, all the people, a whole bunch of men came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. I just need a pause. We're just gonna pull this apart as we go. Okay, early in the morning. What time do you think it is? 8, 8:30. 9 o'clock for the late risers. I don't know, because in that, like in their culture, they're like getting up with sunrise, right? If it's summertime, I don't know, Passover, this about so springish. So yeah, it's like 7 in the morning. And the scribes and Pharisees bring a woman caught in adultery. Okay, so that's fun, right? So there are two primary like threads here. Had she been caught that morning? Had they actually like caught her that morning in the act of adultery? If so, how does that happen? How does that happen that you catch someone at 6 in the morning conveniently so that you can bring her to the temple where Jesus is going to be teaching and use her as a prop to try to frame Jesus, right? So there's that, right? I think a lot of people read this as if we just caught her in the act of adultery. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. So this is one of those issues of technology and my laptop. I think maybe I added an application this week that was overwhelming to my laptop, maybe. I'm not sure. So thank you for hanging in there. And so I was talking about the being caught in the very act of committing adultery. Teacher, right? So the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who'd been caught in adultery and making her stand before all of them. So that was why I was asking you to picture it in your mind, right? What time of day is it? How's everybody dressed? Is there a little bit of hangover from the party the night before? Because this is a Passover week and everybody's, there's no reason to think they're not partying the way we might party. I don't know if you like to imbibe. I don't imbibe anymore, but I sure used to. And so I know that morning after thing and had a little bit too much. So they're all gathered. Some are sitting down. He's sitting down. They bring a woman in front of all of these men in the temple, the holiest space. So the question is, did they catch her in the act last night, this morning? How do you do that? Do you set up outside a sex worker's house knowing that that's what she's going to be doing? Do you entrap a sex worker, send one of your buddies in there to, procure her services and just happen to catch them together? Like, how do you do this, right? Someone else has suggested, well, they'd caught her in the act of adultery previously, and they didn't know how to handle it. And so here we are 3 weeks later and we still haven't punished anyone. So let's ask Jesus how to handle that, right? Which is ridiculous, because we all know that if you're really interested in punishing a woman, you're going to do it right away. You're going to find a way to do it right away and make it as painful as possible, prolonged as possible. Anyway, okay. So what's the deal, right? How do you catch someone in adultery, in the very act of adultery, right? Without some sort of collusion, participation on somebody's part. And as several of you noted, where's the dude? It takes two. Why is it just the female, right? And in the later laws, so in Deuteronomy, we're going to stone the woman to death. In Exodus, we stone the woman to death for adultery. In Deuteronomy, it's bring them both, and we're going to stone them both to death. Thank you very much. So at least there's some progression in terms of egalitarian or equality in that issue, right? So yeah, according to Deuteronomy, the later and therefore the more progressive ideas, they should both be there, right? And even just in general, you don't catch a person in the act of adultery, you catch two. Okay, so we all get it. We're starting off with a premise that just you can't even get your mind around. You can't even be like, oh, sure, yeah, No, from the very start, I'm out the door. Like, no, this is dumb. Okay, but we have to keep playing along. Okay, so let's keep playing along. This woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? Which is interesting, because he could have just said, bring the dude here and we'll do it. Because that would have called them out on their duplicity, right? But he didn't say that. So apparently Jesus isn't as smart as some of us. I don't know. They said this to test him, right? So what's the test? The test is about upholding the Mosaic law or the Roman law. That's the test, okay? They don't have permission. Legally, they're not allowed to execute one of their own people, even if that's what their laws say to do. That still has to be handed over to the Romans. Okay, so that's the tension, and that's where the test is in this. Is he going to say to do that and pick up stones and let's all kill her and just get this done and we'll just bury the body and nobody will have to know? Is he and the ongoing conversations then between Jesus and Jewish leaders is about which way you're going to apply the law. And that, in my understanding of if there had been a guy to whom we can kind of point back to on some sort of level, he would have been upset that his own Jewish leaders were not abiding by the spirit of the law, at least. And so that's why it's fair game in a sense for them to be like, oh yeah, so what are you going to do with this? Right? In a sense, whatever. Okay. So The law of Moses commands us to stone such women. Now what do you say? They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him, right? He said, yeah, go for it. That would be, go get the Roman guards, right? And then if he says, no, Mosaic law is crap, they're like, yep, get rid of him because he's not actually Jewish, or whatever, right? So Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them. So this is another piece where people like to take a little sidebar and be like, oh, what is he drawing in the dirt, right? And I've heard some pretty impassioned suggestions there. And I do love people's imagination on this, right? Some people have suggested he started writing out the 10 Commandments, or maybe shorthand for the 10 Commandments. Some people suggest he started writing names of people. Oh, I'd do this left, right. He would have been doing right to left. Names of people who had committed adultery, or names of people who, who had had sex with this woman, or, right, like names of people for whatever, hangman. I don't know. Like, what is he doing? What's he drawing in the dirt? I don't know. Was it specific, or was it just a distraction so that they would stop looking at her? That's the other piece of this. How is she dressed, right? It's bad enough that you're bringing a woman in front of a large crowd of men early in the morning. And if she's just been caught in adultery, she might not be fully clothed. But if she, this is we caught her a few weeks ago, whatever. Okay. But is he just drawing attention away from her? Is he trying to call them to account? Like, what's the purpose of the dirt drawing? Okay. So when they kept on questioning, he straightened up and said to them, let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her, right? That's a cultural artifact, right? You hear that, some sort of reference to that a lot, right? Let he who's without sin, all the she's with sin and the non-he or she just get off scot-free. Anyway, sorry, I'm tired and it's been a long week. And once again, so let's focus, Jen. He bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one. Any among you who is without sin, be the first to throw a stone. They went away one by one, beginning with the elders, which makes sense, right? Those of us, the longer you've been around, hopefully, the more mercy you have, the more perspective you have. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So here's the crucial moment from my perspective, because I hear people refer to this story a lot. And I hear people say that Jesus is just so fantastic here. And so I'd like to suggest that maybe we look at it a little bit differently. Jesus straightened up and said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, sir. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again. Okay. So, progressive. Really, really lovely in terms of, nobody here's perfect. So why don't you just shut your trap, mind your own business, and right, and just leave this woman the bleep alone, right? I think there's something super refreshing and helpful in that, for sure, especially given the context and other passages in the Bible and the way they demonize women in general, whether or not there's some sort of sexual sin involved. Okay. So there's that. Yes. Thank you, Jesus, literally, for this story, or for being a person on whom this story could be attached so that people will take it seriously, right? Nobody's perfect. Love more, judge less, right? Just, yeah. Okay. That's good stuff. But let's take it a little bit farther, because this is Jesus. This is the Newer Testament texts. This is John's gospel of all things, right? So whole little sidebar in terms of Newer Testament studies and the relative historicity of the synoptics versus John. So John's gospel is so far from being historically accurate on any kind of level, right? But the irony or sad part of that something is that a lot of Christians really, really like John's gospel, and for good reason. There are a lot of definitive claims in here. This is the gospel from which this is the only one where we get that Jesus really is God, right? You don't get the divine Jesus in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. You get a guy who's called Son of God, which is not a divine person. That is a human who is being given divine-like parentage, right? Totally different. So, and that's confusing for a lot of people. Understandable. Okay, so, so we've got, but it's Jesus, right? It's the guy that people turn to, supposedly. Though on the topic of actual words about marriage, Christians actually don't turn to Jesus, which is fascinating to me. But this story, we're just here for this story today. Where are they, woman? Has no one condemned you? No, no one, sir. Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again. I could have just done with just neither do I condemn you. Have a good day. That would have been awesome. But it's not. And so what has happened here is that we don't know the setup. We don't know that. I mean, again, this isn't even historically accurate necessarily, but it's a story. And so let's posit that it happened, right? How does this particular scenario play out? Is it just, neighbors who fell in love and they're having sex, and so she's brought before them? And so the whole scenario is just unjust for her. So somebody needs to be apologizing to her, not just saying, I don't condemn you, but saying, holy shit, you just got used. You were just brought in front of half the town of men that you have to see day in and day out. You've just been brought in front of all of them. Shame, 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 shame. Also, we can try to frame Jesus or trick Jesus into saying something he shouldn't be saying. It makes my stomach turn, folks. It is disgusting to me that we're okay with and think that this is a great response on Jesus' part, because it is utterly falling short. Nobody addresses what has been done to her, the way she has been brought out, and, it's just disgusting. And then let's, so we could play out the different scenarios. Like, why are we calling, the issue of sex is important. I get that, right? I'm a big fan of supporting couples, and being, supporting them and doing their thing well and committing to each other and supporting them in that. And I'm also aware that there's a lot of variation out there in terms of the way couples work. And I'm not a big fan of judging the way other couples live their lives. So this element, this really heavy dose of judgment and sinfulness connected to sex in the wrong way. That's what I'm trying to highlight here, that Jesus's words are underscoring, are encouraging. And do not sin again. Like, who said that she did? A bunch of scribes and Pharisees? A bunch of men who have no compunction over, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, okay. So then there's the other side of it, that how do you know? How do they catch in the very act? And that's where my thoughts used to go to, just, this is a sex worker. There's no way to do this otherwise. Like, how do you do this without somebody defending or stepping in to defend or protect her or something? You know what I mean? Like, how do you just bring the woman and not the man? Like, all the pieces just didn't make sense to me. And so for a long time, I just kind of sat with this as, this is a sex worker and they're just using her. And if that's the case, then her livelihood is being called a sin. Again, just like yesterday's conversation. And I'm not okay with that, because she has to survive. So don't go tell her to stop sinning, to don't sin ever again, because she's got to put food on the table. And so just fuck you, right? Like, that's where my thoughts go. I don't need that to be the story, that she's a sex worker and that's why they were able to catch her and all that stuff. But my point is, I just think this is first century. This is progressive, or some sort of, yay, this is a step in the right direction, but it falls way too far short, in my opinion, for actually being good advice for us or a good example for how to handle something like this clusterfuck that just took place. Forgiving because all of us have none of us are perfect, like that I'm fully on board with, fully. But the rest of it, how we read all of these stories, how I shouldn't say we, how in the tradition I grew up in, and the the ways I see other people, even like in social media and all kinds of places, talking about forgiveness and sin and judgment and all those kinds of things, right? Lost my train of thought. um you know there are moments in the gospels or in the writings of some sort of progressive claim for the first century, but it's no longer progressive. It's actually outdated again, right? So it's like, sure, kind of like in Ephesians, sure, telling men to actually love their women's, that was progressive at the time. But like, guess what? It's followed by and preceded by lines that tell women to be subject to those men as they're subject to the Lord and to fear those men. And by the way, we can go a little bit farther than just saying love her like you love your own body, because it's just not enough. It's not enough. I think that's where these moments of people are excited because there's something different from the rest of the cluster that these things called the Bible, these stories that are in the Bible, like they're just so judgmental and heavy and sin, yeah. And so you have something like that says, oh, guess what? Nobody's without sin. Go figure. Everybody left. All right. Like that's a lovely progressive kind of a concept, I'm assuming at the time, but like not enough for me. Nowhere near enough for me. Okay. So I'm going to look over here at, they all walked away first. I mean, there's that, so according to the story, again, none of this is actually historical or whatever, but if we let the story play out on the stage, right? A theater stage, there's a bunch of men gathered early in the morning. Some powerful men swoop in, bringing a woman whom they caught in the very act of adultery. And I say it that way because I want you to think about it that way, that they're going to layer that with as much accusation and venom as they can. And partly because women are judged differently than men are when it comes to sex in general, and partly because they're the ones in control and in charge. They have power in that space. It's their space, right? The scribes and Pharisees, it's their space. There's so many things about this that just make me sick to my stomach, because I can think about it happening in a different way today, So, yeah, Jesus calls them on it and they all leave. And then he has a moment with her that's relatively progressive for the time, but it's just not enough for me. It's just not enough. And that's the thing. What are people saying and doing? Like when people want to turn to Jesus as an example, this is a fairly progressive one, and it's not enough, right? He has other very judgmental claims being ascribed to him. That whole thing about sit on the right and the left, and enter my Father's kingdom and judgment for all eternity. Like Jesus is ascribed with some pretty seriously judgmental and hateful, essentially, kinds of ideas. Well, okay, well, that's a thing of apocalyptic whatever, but like, I'm still concerned that he's still talking about people as enemies, for instance. And instead of hating your enemy, I say love your enemy. But he's still calling people enemy. You know what I'm saying? He's still doing that. He's still perpetuating the category of humans as enemy. And so the same kind of thing here. Okay, I think I've said it enough. I can let you all go. I can stop talking. You got my points. The man was there, but it didn't matter for the Pharisees' main purpose to frame Jesus in regards to adultery, only women. But yeah, the scribe Pharisee who slept with her was clear. You think she, yeah, he was, yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting suggestion. That's probably true, right? You know, in terms of if this actually took place. Yeah, women were punished harshly for adultery. That is definitely what the scriptures suggest. And it is certainly a thing that is still taking place in that part of the world where people are influenced by these kinds of ideas and constructs, not just in Muslim spaces, but we do know that in some very conservative or Islamic contexts, people are still women are still being stoned or still being killed for adultery. The stoning of Soraya M. Is a really helpful movie to those ends in terms of highlighting the way it worked and still is playing out for people. I know you've heard about honor killings, things like that. It's not, yeah. But I don't know what other contexts are like in that part of the world in terms of similar ways of talking about women's bodies as being owned by men. It's difficult. I'm really makes my stomach turn. So all of these conversations come back to, right, how we value women. And then there is a negative impact for men when you don't speak of women as fully human, right? Everybody on the planet, and I'm sorry for the binary there, but I do acknowledge and respect and embrace that humans reflect more than just a binary in terms of gender. But biblically speaking, it all comes back to this issue. Men believe, men talk, the scriptures talk as if women and their bodies are possessed by men, are ruled over by men, that men have a special entitlement to women's bodies that the women don't have for their own bodies, and that we still see those ideas playing out today, right? That's why I care. Sex, biblical ideas that touch on marriage, adultery, procreation, they're all focused on men, not women. And everybody loses when that happens, right? We're all affected when some are oppressed, regardless of the type of oppression. I really need to stop talking and let you guys go. Oh, dear God. Yeah. Thank you, Caterpillar. I'm going to let you all go. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for hanging in there with my tech issues today. I very much appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to do what I can to fix that for tomorrow. And we'll put up the little thing soon if I can. And thank you for this month of being here and meeting me, and for watching later, for those of you who watch later, and all of that good stuff. And so I'll see you all tomorrow. Try to be closer to 3:00. See you then. See, it's taking forever to just end the broadcast. So yeah.